When the sky quiets and the stars begin to hum, you've found your way home. Tonight, let the world slip away. Let every worry drift behind you like footprints in the sand of time. You are not just resting, you're about to travel farther than you've ever imagined. This is not a dream. This is the beginning of everything. Before Percy Jackson was a name, before Camp Half-Blood echoed with laughter and battle cries, before the gods sat on thrones of marble and gold, there was only darkness. And from that darkness came stories, soft ones, scary ones, stories so old they shaped the sky above and the earth below. But don't worry, this is not a tale of fear. It's a gentle walk through legend, a slow river of myth winding towards sleep. Every great hero you know, every prophecy, every sword and secret kiss. It all began here. The world you're about to enter isn't filled with battles, not tonight. It's filled with lullabies made of lightning and dreams carved from stone. You're not just going to hear a story, you're going to feel it stretch across time itself. And yet, in this calm retelling, even the fiercest storms will feel like summer rain. Because this is not the war. This is the memory of how it all came to be. And it starts in the quiet, with chaos, with Gaea, with the sky and the sea, and the spark of something ancient, something that whispered, "Let there be Olympus." So close your eyes, little dreamer. You're not alone. The gods are watching, the stars are listening, and the story is just about to begin. Let us drift back to the very beginning, to the first gods and the age of Titans. In the beginning, there was nothing. No sky, no sea, no light, no gods. Just silence, vast and endless, stretching across eternity like a blank page waiting for a story. And then, chaos. Not the chaos of noise or war, but the first being, the quiet hum before a song begins. From chaos came Gaea, the earth, cradling all future life in her ancient arms. Then, Tartarus, the pit below, yawning wide in the depths of the world. And Eros, the spark of love, soft and strange, binding the cosmos with invisible threads. Nyx, the night, followed with her velvet shadows, and Erebus, the darkness within the dark. These weren't gods yet. They were forces, emotions with shape, dreams with voices. Gaea awoke alone in the void, and from the pain of solitude, she birthed Uranus, the sky, to cover her, to hold her. And he did, but not with love. He was cold, vast, and full of fear. Together they created the first children, the 12 mighty Titans, the Cyclopes with their blazing single eyes, and the 100-handed ones with limbs like crashing waves. But Uranus saw their strength and feared it. So one by one, he locked them deep inside Gaea's body, burying them in the earth that had birthed them. Gaea groaned in pain, not just from the weight of her children, but from betrayal. From that pain grew fury, and from that fury, a plan. She crafted a jagged scythe and gave it to her youngest Titan, Kronos, the only one bold enough to strike down the sky. And when Uranus came again to smother the earth in silence, Kronos rose. He did not hesitate. With one swing, the old era ended in blood and stars. The sky recoiled. The world changed. But the cycle had only begun. Kronos, now ruler, freed his siblings and declared a golden age, an age without pain, without tyranny. But fear is a legacy, and power always whispers to itself. Kronos heard a prophecy that one of his own children would rise against him, just as he had done. So, just like his father, Kronos began swallowing his children at birth. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon consumed before they could even cry. But one child escaped. Zeus, hidden by his mother Rhea in a cradle of stone, raised in secret, fed on wild honey and the milk of a divine goat. And when he grew strong, he returned not just with power, but with justice. He tricked Kronos into vomiting up his siblings, now fully grown. Together, the young gods waged war against the Titans. It lasted 10 years, thunder against mountain, ocean against fire. But even with their strength, they could not win. Not until Gaea whispered again. "Free your monstrous uncles," she said. The 100-handed ones, locked away in Tartarus, joined the fight. And with them came the shift, the moment the sky cracked and the Titans fell. Kronos was sliced apart and cast into the pit he had once ignored. The gods took their thrones on Mount Olympus. Zeus claimed the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld. And yet, the victory was not peace. It was only a pause. Because already, seeds of new rivalries were blooming. The oracle stirred beneath Delphi, and the first whispers of the great prophecy curled through time like smoke. A child of the big three would one day rise, and either save the gods or destroy them. But that was far away. For now, Olympus gleamed. A new age had begun, the age of gods, monsters, and the slowly ticking countdown to a boy named Percy Jackson. The gods had won. But peace is never simple, especially not when it's earned through war. From their thrones on Mount Olympus, the newly crowned Olympians looked down on the world, reshaping it with thunder, sea foam, and firelight. Zeus ruled the skies with bolts of raw judgment. Poseidon stirred the oceans into roaring kingdoms. Hades carved a realm beneath the earth, where shadows whispered and the dead remembered. Each god built palaces, claimed domains, and began sculpting humanity itself. But not all wounds had healed far below in Tartarus. The Titans still twisted with hatred, and Gaea's silence was not forgiveness, only waiting. Meanwhile, mortals began to multiply fragile, clever creatures that the gods found either delightful or disposable. Some gods walked among them in disguise, taking lovers, giving gifts, shaping cities. Others remained distant, cold as constellations. But even in this golden age, the cracks formed early. Hera burned with jealousy. Athena guarded wisdom like a blade. Ares stirred wars for fun, and Dionysus turned grief into wildness. The gods' children, half mortal, half divine, began to appear across the world. Demigods, gifted, powerful, cursed. And with them came chaos. These children fought monsters, built temples, founded empires, and sometimes died before their first birthday. To help them survive, the gods created a refuge, a hidden place of safety. Camp Half-Blood. Nestled at the edge of Long Island, masked by magical borders, the camp became a sanctuary where young heroes trained with swords and dreams, hoping they'd live long enough to become legends. But some gods ignored their children. Others broke the ancient laws by having too many. The worst offenders were the big three: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, whose children carried destiny like wildfire. And after one such child caused a war that nearly destroyed Olympus, the brothers made a pact. No more demigod children would be born from them. A quiet agreement sealed in guilt. But fate doesn't care for promises. In secret, Hades had already fathered two children, Nico and Bianca D'Angelo, and hidden them in a magical hotel outside of time. Poseidon, years later, would break the pact too. And as for Zeus, well, he already had a daughter in hiding, Thalia. These were not just children. They were time bombs, each one tied to the great prophecy that loomed like a shadow no god dared name aloud. A prophecy that foretold a hero born of the big three who would reach the age of 16 and make a choice that would either save Olympus or end it. The gods pretended to forget, but every thunderclap, every wave, every crack in the earth was a reminder. The clock had already started, and somewhere in the heart of New York, a boy was growing up with no idea he was a son of the sea, destined to rise into legend, wrapped in storms and secrets. His name was not yet known, but his story was already waiting, because while the gods ruled the world above, destiny stirred quietly below. And still, the world wasn't quiet, not even with Olympus crowned and the Titans chained, because no matter how many wars were won or how many promises made, the gods could not help but repeat themselves. Pride, fear, power, these were their truest children. And the mortals, they watched, worshipped, and sometimes rebelled. From the ashes of Titan rule rose new empires, Mycenae, Athens, Rome, each blessed or cursed by gods, who walked among them in sandals or shadows. Heroes were born to bridge the gap. Perseus, slayer of Medusa. Heracles, who bore the weight of 12 impossible tasks. Achilles, dipped in the Styx, doomed by his own heel. These weren't bedtime legends. They were the first demigods, half-mortal titans of fate, who proved over and over that divine blood did not mean peace. It meant purpose, and purpose meant war. Every generation, new heroes rose. Every empire, a new prophecy whispered. Even when the gods shifted into Roman forms, Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, the pattern stayed the same. Glory followed by blood. The gods split their identities, their temples, their stories, and yet they were always the same. Lightning still struck, oceans still swelled, the underworld still called. By the time the modern world rose with cars, cities, and airplanes, Olympus had moved too. Hovering invisibly above the Empire State Building, the gods adapted to survive. They traded togas for business suits, but their old battles, those never ended. Monsters didn't die. They reformed again and again, rising from Tartarus with each new war. Demigods still wandered the world, misunderstood, abandoned, hunted by creatures no mortal could name. Some were taken in by camp half-blood. Others weren't so lucky. And the prophecy, it lingered, always waiting. For the moment one child born of the big three would turn 16, and whether that child would rise a savior or fall a weapon. The fates had already chosen their threads, and in just a few short years, the world would know the name of Percy Jackson. But first, there were others. Before the son of Poseidon ever held a sword, others had carved the path. Heroes of hidden wars, victories lost in time. And it is their footsteps we now follow into the quiet years between myth and modern day, where monsters roamed unnoticed, and history forgot the price they paid. They don't teach these stories in school. The wars fought in shadows, the heroes who never made it into statues, the monsters that vanished without a name, but they happened. In the quiet centuries between Olympus's rise and Percy Jackson's first breath, the world was far from silent. It pulsed with secret battles and forgotten oaths, with swords drawn under moonlight and prophecies whispered in crumbling temples. The ancient demigods, Perseus, Atalanta, Heracles, Odysseus, were just the beginning. As human civilizations rose and fell, demigods kept being born, pulled into quests they never asked for. Some became legends, some were lost to history. And through it all, Camp Half-Blood stood quietly at the edge of time, hidden by magic and mist, a sanctuary for the children of gods who lived too long and loved too briefly. Centuries passed like breath. The Greek gods adapted, changed their names to Jupiter, Mars, Pluto and followed empires like Rome across the world. New camps formed, like Camp Jupiter in the west, a military haven for Roman demigods who valued order over chaos, strategy over prophecy. But even with their new faces, the gods were still the same: proud, vengeful, stubborn, and their children inherited those flaws. The Roman Empire's fall did not end the war. It just changed the battlefield. Through the Dark Ages, Renaissance, and Industrial Revolution, monsters still stirred in forgotten caves, and young demigods still vanished from homes and orphanages, lured into quests by visions and dreams. Some returned stronger. Some never returned at all. But the most dangerous children were the ones born of the big three: Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Their power was different, wilder, less predictable. And over time, the gods learned to fear their own blood. Hades, especially, suffered in silence. Cast away to rule the underworld, he fathered two children, Bianca and Nico D'Angelo, and hid them in a place outside of time. The Lotus Hotel and Casino, where the years pass like mist. He didn't want them found. He didn't want them harmed. But fate doesn't ask for permission. And across the world, another child had already been born in defiance of an ancient oath. Thalia Grace, daughter of Zeus, fierce and bright, wandered the mortal world like a storm. Her existence was a secret until it wasn't. Her death, defending her friends near Camp Half-Blood's borders, changed everything. In her final breath, Zeus transformed her into a tree, her spirit becoming a shield that protected the camp. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew. The pact had been broken. Again. But even that tragedy was just a prelude, because beneath the earth something old was waking. Kronos, scattered in pieces after the Titan War, had begun to stir in the deepest pit of Tartarus. Not yet whole, not yet strong, but whispering, planting thoughts in mortal minds, promising power to the forgotten. And one demigod, Luke Castellan, would listen, son of Hermes, abandoned, angry. He would become the spark of something ancient. But that moment was still to come. For now, Camp Half-Blood trained new heroes in secret. Camp Jupiter kept its own code. And across both worlds, Greek and Roman, past and future, the stage was quietly being set. Because even in silence, history always moves toward prophecy. Not every hero wore bronze, and not every war made it into the history books. Some of the most important battles in the Percy Jackson world happened when no one was watching, when gods were quiet, when monsters moved through the fog of forgotten places, and when demigods lived and died between eras, leaving behind no songs, no statues, only ripples in fate. After the Roman Empire collapsed, the world entered a strange kind of twilight. Magic dimmed, but it never vanished. The mist, that ancient force that hides the truth of the mythological world from mortal eyes, grew stronger, weaving illusions across continents. Monsters disguised themselves as men. Oracles hid in ruins. And Camp Half-Blood became more secretive than ever, a hidden heartbeat under the chaos of history. The gods still had children, of course they always did. But now those children were born into times of war, famine, discovery. They were caught in crusades, in revolutions, in world-changing inventions. Some fought in ancient battles. Others walked among kings. And when the world tipped into the 20th century, something shifted again. The gods, sensing another great age of conflict, watched with unease. 2 world wars loomed. Millions would die. And among the soldiers and spies and lost boys were demigods. sons of Ares fought in the trenches of World War I. Daughters of Athena cracked enemy codes in World War II. And in the chaos, the children of the Big Three were born again, or rather, discovered again. A child of Hades, cursed and powerful, brought death too easily. A son of Poseidon vanished during a sea battle, lost to the depths. And from the skies, another bolt of fate struck a child of Zeus, who rose too quickly and fell too hard. These demigods were not just powerful, they were dangerous. Their presence attracted monsters, threatened to unravel the mist, and tipped the delicate balance between gods and mortals. After the Second War, the gods finally made a decision not out of mercy, but fear. The Big Three agreed. No more children, no exceptions, no loopholes. A sacred oath was sworn, one that echoed through Olympus and down into the deepest corners of the underworld. And for a while, they kept it. Decades passed. The world grew faster, louder, more mortal. Technology bloomed. Cities swallowed forests. And yet, monsters still found their way through. Camp Half-Blood struggled to keep up. Its borders flickered. The gods, more distant than ever, left their children to fend for themselves. Some made it to the camp. Others vanished without ever knowing who they were. And in this growing silence, something else was moving. In a small New York apartment, a woman raised her child alone, never speaking of the sea god who had once appeared in her life. That child, strange and bright, would grow up thinking he was nothing special, just a boy who couldn't stay in one school, who felt out of place in the world, who loved his mom and hated math. He didn't know yet that the ocean itself recognized him, that the winds whispered his name, that the great prophecy long dormant had already begun to stir. His name was Percy Jackson, but his story hadn't started yet. First, the tree had to fall. The barrier had to break. The gods had to stop pretending they were in control, because fate doesn't wait, and even hidden wars eventually come to light. Some stories are buried not because they were forgotten, but because they were too dangerous to remember. As the 20th century crept toward its final decades, the demigod world stood on the edge of something it couldn't name, not yet. The gods, distant and secretive, watched as mortals built machines that touched the moon and tore apart cities. But their children? Their children were still being born, still hunted, still left to survive impossible things. The cracks were forming everywhere. Thalia's death, noble and tragic, hadn't just created a tree, it created a wound. One that bled fear, prophecy, and doubt. The magical borders of Camp Half-Blood had grown strong around her sacrifice, but the gods had grown weaker in their silence. And from that silence, rebellion grew. Luke Castellan, once a loyal camper, began to rot from the inside with bitterness. Abandoned by his father Hermes, shaped by pain, he wandered through the cracks of the world, whispering to monsters, finding allies in the shadows. He didn't want to destroy Olympus out of chaos, he wanted revenge, justice, a world where demigods were no longer discarded. And it was that heartbreak, not Kronos' whispers, that made him dangerous. Elsewhere, young heroes trained without knowing what waited beyond the trees. The children of Athena sharpened their minds. The children of Ares sharpened their swords. But none of them were ready, because something ancient was rising. Kronos, long thought destroyed, had begun to gather strength. His essence, scattered in Tartarus, was reforming, slowly, drawn to the bitterness of the forgotten and the fury of the betrayed. Monsters that had been vanquished began to crawl back into the world. Furies, hellhounds, spirits from the underworld. The mist wavered. The lines between myth and reality thinned. And then, in the middle of all this quiet chaos, came a boy. A boy with black hair, sea-green eyes, and no clue what he was. Percy Jackson. Troubled kid, misunderstood student, a walking mystery to every teacher who ever tried to tame him. But the world knew. The sea knew. And soon, he would too. Because his time had come. The pact had been broken. The prophecy was alive. The lightning bolt had gone missing. And the boy who would soon be called Son of Poseidon was about to take his first step into a world of gods, monsters, and destiny. But for now, he was just a kid on a school trip, with a storm brewing in the distance. Let us begin the first chapter of the legend. The year is 2005, and Percy Jackson is about to meet his fate. The first time Percy Jackson saw his pre-algebra teacher turn into a fury, he thought he was losing his mind, and in a way he was. Not because he was hallucinating, but because the world he thought he knew was about to fall apart. Before that moment, Percy was just a 12-year-old kid from New York with a messy life. A missing father, a loving but exhausted mom, and a stepdad who made the word disgusting feel like a compliment. He bounced from school to school, labeled a troublemaker, a dyslexic daydreamer, a kid who never quite fit in. But underneath all that chaos was something ancient, something watching. The sea had always whispered to him. Storms liked him a little too much, and monsters, real ones, had already started circling. But Percy didn't know that yet. Not when he stepped into the Metropolitan Museum of Art on that field trip. Not when his teacher, Mrs. Dodds, transformed into a winged fury and tried to kill him in front of a marble statue. Not when his best friend Grover started acting like he knew more than he let on. And especially not when Percy was handed a glowing pen that turned into a sword. This wasn't magic. This was bloodline. This was destiny waking up. The attack shattered the illusion of his normal life. His mother, Sally, saw it coming. She rushed Percy to safety toward a mysterious summer camp he'd never heard of, pursued by a minotaur that tore through trees and tossed cars like toys. And in a moment that would change everything, Percy watched his mother vanish into golden dust, taken by the monster before he could save her. Rage, grief, power. It all collided in one moment, and Percy, barely conscious of what he was, slayed the beast with its own horn. That's how he arrived at Camp Half-Blood. Broken, bloody, alone, but alive. And as he crossed the camp's magical borders, the truth finally caught up to him. He wasn't just a kid with bad grades. He was a demigod, the son of a god who hadn't claimed him. A boy tied to a prophecy older than Olympus itself. And the gods? They were already watching, because something had been stolen. Something powerful. Zeus's master bolt, the weapon of storms, had vanished, and war was looming between the gods. The sky was tense. The sea was restless. And the name on everyone's lips was a boy who didn't even know who his father was yet. Percy Jackson. The gods don't wait, and neither does destiny. The moment Percy Jackson crossed the borders of Camp Half-Blood, his entire world changed. Again. This wasn't just some summer camp with archery and canoeing. It was a sanctuary built for survival. A place where monsters lurked beyond the woods and teenagers trained like warriors. The cabins stood in a horseshoe, each dedicated to a different god, each one buzzing with stories and rivalries centuries old. And yet, one cabin stood empty, the one at the end, the one with Poseidon's trident carved in weathered stone. Percy didn't know yet that it belonged to him. He was placed in the Hermes cabin, the catch-all for unclaimed demigods, crammed in with kids from every divine lineage, sleeping shoulder to shoulder with orphans of Olympus. But he was different. The others could feel it. So could the monsters. And so could the gods. The longer Percy stayed, the louder the whispers became. He met Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena, sharp-tongued, brilliant, brave, and she saw it immediately. He was special, and that made him dangerous. Chiron, the wise centaur, who posed as Percy's teacher in disguise, confirmed the truth no one wanted to say. The gods believed Percy had stolen the Master Bolt. Zeus was ready for war. Poseidon remained silent. And the deadline for the bolt's return? The summer solstice, just days away. Then it happened in front of the entire camp. During a game of Capture the Flag, Percy was claimed. Not in words, but in light. A glowing green trident shimmered above his head, casting ripples across the field and silencing every camper. Poseidon had broken the oath. The son of the sea god now stood revealed, and with him the prophecy stirred. The camp was no longer just a home. It was a battleground of suspicion and fate. Percy, barely 12, was given a quest. Retrieve the Master Bolt before the gods went to war. Find the real thief. Survive the monsters. And maybe, just maybe, find his mother still trapped in the underworld. He didn't go alone. Annabeth joined him, determined to prove herself. Grover came too, loyal and nervous, but hiding a courage Percy hadn't seen yet. Together, they left the only safe place they knew and stepped into a world that had no intention of letting them live. And somewhere beneath it all, something else had begun to move. A darker force than anyone suspected. Because this wasn't just about a missing bolt. It was about the rise of something older than Olympus, and Percy was walking straight into its shadow. A quest is supposed to be a path, something heroic, something noble, something clear. But Percy Jackson's first journey into the world of gods and monsters was anything but. From the moment he left Camp Half-Blood, the world seemed determined to kill him. The gods offered no help. The monsters never stopped coming. And every mile toward Los Angeles, where the entrance to the underworld lay hidden, brought Percy closer to answers he might not be ready for. The trio traveled by bus, by train, by truck, always one step ahead of danger, always one breath away from disaster. They battled furies disguised as kindly old ladies, nearly became statues in Medusa's lair, and barely escaped an encounter with Ares, the war god himself, whose anger hung over them like smoke. Each challenge chipped away at Percy's doubt, sharpening something inside him. This wasn't just a quest for a missing weapon. It was a test, a gauntlet. And along the way, Percy discovered pieces of himself he didn't know existed. A connection to the ocean that healed him, that answered him, that obeyed him. But the deeper they went, the more twisted the path became. Hades denied stealing the bolt. Instead, he accused Percy of something worse, stealing the Helm of Darkness, a symbol of power from the underworld itself. And worst of all, Percy's mother was there, alive, a prisoner. But rescuing her would mean dooming his friends. And so, for the first time in his life, Percy made a hero's choice. He left his mother behind. They escaped the underworld and returned to the surface changed, tired, but not finished. With help from Poseidon's messenger, Percy finally reached Olympus, hidden in the clouds above the Empire State Building. There, before the thrones of the gods, he returned the Master Bolt to Zeus and learned the truth. The real thief had been Luke, not just a fellow camper, a friend. Luke had been working with Kronos, the Titan Lord, long thought destroyed. Kronos was not dead. He was rising, slowly, patiently, whispering into the hearts of angry demigods like Luke, turning them against Olympus. Percy's quest hadn't stopped a war, it had revealed one. A war that would stretch across years, across books, across lives. Percy returned to Camp Half-Blood a hero, but not in celebration. In silence. He had saved the gods, but exposed their greatest weakness, themselves. And beneath the victory was a storm still brewing. The prophecy still loomed. The betrayal still burned. Percy had found his mother, his father, his strength, but the cost was innocence. The boy who had entered the world of gods as a lost kid from New York had returned a demigod touched by fate. And as summer faded, one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. Because just off the coast, deep in the sea, something was stirring. A new threat, a poison tree, and a golden fleece that could save everything or doom it all. The sea had more monsters to offer, and Percy Jackson was about to dive in again. It began with a dream, a nightmare of fire, ruin, and a friend in danger. That's how the second story always begins, not with a prophecy, but with a warning. Percy Jackson, just 1 year after saving Olympus from war, was back at school, and back in trouble. But this time, the danger didn't wait for a field trip. It came crashing through the dodgeball court in the form of man-eating giants disguised as sixth graders. And in the middle of it all was Tyson, a homeless boy with one eye, childlike strength, and a mysterious bond to Percy that even Percy didn't understand yet. When Annabeth burst through the chaos to rescue them, everything changed again. Because Camp Half-Blood was under threat, not just from monsters, but from within. Thalia's tree, the magical barrier that protected the camp, had been poisoned. Its power was fading, the borders weakening. Monsters were slipping through. The camp was dying, and no one knew why. Chiron had been fired, replaced by the cruel corporate Tantalus. Trust had eroded. Campers turned on each other. The gods were silent. And worst of all, Percy was having visions of Grover lost, afraid, and trapped by something ancient. A Cyclops. The only way to save both Grover and the camp was to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece, a magical artifact, powerful enough to heal Thalia's tree and restore the barrier. But it lay deep within the sea of monsters, what mortals called the Bermuda Triangle, a graveyard of ships, dreams, and forgotten heroes. Clarice, daughter of Ares, was chosen to lead the official quest. But Percy wasn't about to sit back and let his best friend die. So, with Annabeth and Tyson at his side, Percy defied orders, stole a boat, and set sail into a sea that obeyed no laws but its own. The waves were treacherous, the monsters worse. Sirens, hydras, cursed sailors, even the illusion of safety tried to lure them in. And through it all, Tyson began to reveal the truth. He wasn't just some abandoned boy from the streets. He was a son of Poseidon, Percy's brother. The very thing Percy didn't want another reminder that he wasn't the only one, that he wasn't special, that he wasn't enough. But danger forces growth. And in the heart of the sea of monsters, under burning skies and shipwrecked dreams, Percy would learn that family wasn't about who you wanted. It was about who showed up when it mattered. And Tyson, despite all odds, always showed up. The sea never plays fair, and in the sea of monsters, even time and direction betray you. As Percy, Annabeth, and Tyson sailed deeper into waters cursed by ancient wreckage and hungry gods, every wave felt like a test, not just of strength, but of trust. Annabeth, brilliant and brave as ever, tried to chart their way forward, but even she couldn't predict what they'd face. They encountered the sorceress Circe, who turned Percy into a guinea pig literally, until Annabeth used her wits and it conveniently placed Hermes' care package to reverse the spell. Then came the sirens, beautiful and deadly, whose song revealed your deepest desire. Annabeth, unable to resist, dove into their waters, and what Percy saw in her vision shook him. Not power or immortality, but a world rebuilt, peaceful, logical, and free of gods. Even she had doubts about the divine. As they journeyed further, the past began to rise not just in dreams or monsters, but in the form of Luke Castellan. The traitor son of Hermes, now fully allied with Kronos, had grown bolder. His ship, the Princess Andromeda, cruised through the sea like a threat wrapped in steel. Luke didn't hide anymore. He recruited. He plotted. And when Percy finally confronted him, it wasn't just words that cut deep. It was the certainty that Luke believed he was right, that Olympus deserved to fall. Percy barely escaped with his life. And Grover, still trapped by Polyphemus, the ancient Cyclops guarding the Golden Fleece, disguised as a bride to avoid being eaten. The rescue wasn't smooth. The Cyclops was strong, territorial, and old enough to remember Odysseus. But Percy's team, messy, brave, and determined, managed to outwit him and steal the fleece. In a moment of victory, they saved Grover, healed the poison tree, and returned to camp as unlikely heroes. But fate never lets victory last long. The fleece did more than heal the tree. It brought something else back to life. Someone. A girl frozen in time. A hero who had once died protecting her friends. A daughter of Zeus. Thalia Grace. And just like that, the prophecy shifted. Because now there were two potential children of the big three. Two possible heroes of the prophecy. Two paths fate could follow. Percy wasn't the only one anymore. And the war, the real war, had just gained a new player. Sometimes, saving the world comes with consequences you never see coming. When Percy Jackson returned to Camp Half-Blood, with the golden fleece draped across his shoulders and Grover limping beside him, it felt like a victory, a rare one. The poison tree had healed. The camp was safe. The barrier was stronger than ever. For a moment, everything seemed right. But then, the twist. The fleece had worked too well. It didn't just heal Thalia's tree, it brought Thalia back. Flesh and blood. Alive. A daughter of Zeus, no longer a legend carved into campfire stories, but a real girl standing at the edge of the forest, confused, angry, and full of lightning. Her return cracked the prophecy wide open, because now there were two demigods of the big three nearing the age of 16. Two lives capable of tipping the balance between Olympus and destruction. And while the gods said nothing, everyone could feel the shift. Percy, once certain that he alone carried the weight of fate, now saw that destiny wasn't a straight line, it was a forked road. One path led through him, the other through Thalia. And deep in the shadows, Kronos watched. Luke's betrayal had grown into something much larger. He wasn't just stealing demigods to join his cause, he was building an army. The sea of monsters hadn't slowed him down. It had only confirmed what he already believed, that the gods were broken, blind, and overdue for replacement. Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Tyson had survived the sea, but they returned to a world more unstable than before. Camp wasn't just a training ground anymore. It was a chessboard, and every camper, every child of Olympus was now a piece. The gods had begun to move their hands, and so had the enemy. But beneath it all, deeper than prophecy or war, something else stirred in Percy. A question. One that wouldn't leave him alone. If the gods were so powerful, why were their children always the ones paying the price? That question would follow him into the next battle. A colder one. One with new hunters, missing demigods, a cursed monster, and a loss that would echo through the stars. The sea had offered its monsters. Now, the sky would bring its curse. The Titan's curse was waiting, and winter was about to fall. It began with a call for help, a distress signal from Grover, urgent and strange, warning of two powerful demigods newly discovered and danger already closing in. Percy Jackson didn't hesitate. He never did. Alongside Annabeth and Thalia, now fully alive and full of stormy tension, Percy rushed to Westover Hall, a gloomy military school perched on a cliff in Maine. What they found was chaos. Monsters disguised as teachers, students who weren't students at all, and two siblings, Nico and Bianca D'Angelo, wide-eyed, confused, and completely unprepared for the truth about their blood. As the monster attacked, chaos erupted. In the battle that followed, Annabeth was taken lost to the void, captured by something dark and ancient. The weight of her absence landed hard. Percy wasn't used to losing her. He wasn't used to losing anyone. And before he could even breathe, reinforcements arrived in the form of Artemis and her hunters immortal, silver-clad girls who had sworn off love, pledged to the goddess of the moon. Among them was Zoe Nightshade, proud, cold, ancient. And Artemis herself, divine and sharp-eyed, took charge. She too sensed something was rising, something no one had seen in millennia. She went hunting alone to track the source of the darkness, and then she vanished, gone without a trace. In a single moment, two of the world's greatest hunters, Annabeth Chase and the goddess Artemis, were lost. And just like that, a new quest was born. Not for glory, not for prophecy, but for rescue. Zoe, Thalia, Bianca, and Grover were chosen to go. Not Percy. But some things don't care about orders. Guided by instinct, friendship, and something deeper, Percy followed them anyway, riding Blackjack, the Pegasus, who would come to trust him like a brother. Their journey westward was brutal. Monsters struck faster. Prophecies loomed louder. They crossed deserts, mountains, and haunted forests, chased by visions and hunted by fate. Thalia grew more unstable, shadows flickering in her eyes. Zoe carried a past she refused to share. Bianca, newly a hunter, struggled to understand her place. And Nico, left behind at camp, had no idea he was being orphaned by destiny. Percy watched it all and carried it. Because deep down, he felt something cold watching him too. A presence, a pull. And with every mile, they were drawn closer to Mount Tamalpais, a mountain hidden in plain sight, rising in California like a wound in the world. That was where the Titan's curse waited. And that was where something would be broken forever. Grief doesn't wait for heroes to rest. It sharpens them. When the quest ended and winter fell across camp, Half-Blood, Percy Jackson returned, changed once more, bruised in body, burdened in spirit. Zoe was gone. Bianca was gone. And Nico D'Angelo, once a curious, bright-eyed kid obsessed with myth and monsters, now stood alone, betrayed, furious, and unknowingly more powerful than anyone realized. Percy had tried to protect him, but fate doesn't reward effort, only consequence. And as Nico vanished into the night, chased by his grief and followed by shadows, the balance of the world tipped again. The pact of the Big Three had been shattered beyond repair. Hades had children. Zeus had Thalia. Poseidon had Percy. And now, the prophecy had choices. Too many. Percy could feel it in the way God started watching more closely, in the way monsters began attacking with sharper purpose, in the way Luke's name became a ghost that never stayed buried. Luke had failed to bring down Olympus, but he hadn't stopped. He was regrouping, preparing. Kronos was no longer just a whisper in the dark, he was a presence, a plan, a pulse. Chiron knew it. The oracle remained silent, and Annabeth, ever brilliant, ever dreaming, started to speak of architecture again, not of buildings, but of paths. She believed something was opening beneath their feet, a maze, a myth reborn. The labyrinth, Daedalus's ancient prison of stone and madness, once sealed, now beginning to breathe. And if it truly led everywhere, then it led to Camp Half-Blood too. Luke was done hiding in forests. He was coming from below. And unless someone mapped the maze, found Daedalus, and claimed its secrets before Luke did, the war wouldn't just break Olympus, it would swallow the camp whole. The Titan's curse had cracked the sky. Now the ground would begin to shake, and Percy was about to descend into a war of walls, riddles, betrayal, and something even worse. Choice. Because not every monster can be fought with a sword. Some wait in the dark and call you by name. It started with a hole in the ground, ordinary at first glance, just a crack in the earth behind a school gym. But for Percy Jackson, nothing stayed ordinary for long. That summer, the monsters came early. Camp Half-Blood was no longer a safe place tucked behind magical borders. It was a fortress under siege. Grover returned with panic in his eyes, claiming that the god Pan, long lost, long worshipped, had begun to stir. Annabeth spoke of blueprints, not dreams. A labyrinth, once sealed, had begun expanding again, threading through reality like a living thing. And when Percy and Annabeth followed its trail during a school orientation gone violently wrong, they discovered the truth. The labyrinth of Daedalus was alive, shifting, ancient, and far more dangerous than legend had ever warned. Worse, Luke had already found it. He was gathering forces in its shadows, preparing to use the labyrinth's pathways to launch an invasion on Camp Half-Blood from beneath. A war from the roots. And the only hope to stop him? Find Daedalus the inventor, the exile, and convince him to help the camp before Luke could twist his genius for Kronos. Percy was given no time to breathe. Visions haunted him, showing Kronos' sarcophagus being slowly rebuilt. The Titan Lord was not just whispering, now he was stirring. The prophecy loomed larger, a half-blood of the eldest gods. Still, no one knew which demigod it meant: Percy, Thalia, or Nico, now off the grid and chased by fury. The quest into the labyrinth wasn't a straight line. It was a spiral through madness. Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Tyson dove into its depths, a maze of illusions, monster lairs, and forgotten time. They battled the Telekine's sea demons, forging weapons in boiling forges, and faced Kampa, a monster even nightmares feared. They met Briares, a hundred-handed one who had lost all hope, and faced the eerie cheerfulness of Calypso, who healed Percy on her lonely island only to lose him to fate again. Trust frayed. Annabeth wrestled with her pride and fear of leading. Grover chased whispers of Pan with desperation. Tyson longed for connection and honor. And Percy, always caught between gods and humanity, kept moving forward, even as the walls themselves tried to trap him. Yet the twist came not in battle, but in betrayal. Daedalus had already been found and had already made his choice. Disguised, walking among them, he had been watching all along. He was not the savior they hoped for. He was a man who had lost everything: his son, his soul, and eventually his trust in mortals. The labyrinth pulsed with his grief, and through it, Kronos was almost ready to return. Almost, but not yet. Not while Camp Half-Blood still stood, not while Percy still breathed, not while one final, desperate stand could still be made within the shifting stone. The maze wasn't finished with them, and neither was destiny. And so, some battles are fought in daylight, others in twisting shadows. As Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Tyson wandered deeper into the labyrinth's living core, the lines between memory, magic, and madness began to blur. It wasn't just a maze, it was a test. Of fear, of faith, of friendship. The deeper they went, the more personal the journey became. Annabeth wrestled with the burden of leadership, haunted by her own reflection in the cursed mirror of the Sphinx, whose riddles weren't logical, but cruel. Grover heard the song of the wild growing louder, urging him towards something ancient and final. Tyson, pure-hearted and loyal, became the unexpected light in the dark, his strength holding the group together when the walls seemed to collapse. And Percy, son of Poseidon, chosen or not, began to feel the weight of every prophecy, every monster, every decision pressing in like stone. But just when the labyrinth seemed ready to swallow them whole, hope surfaced. In the form of Rachel Elizabeth, dare a mortal girl with the rare ability to see through the mist. She appeared like a burst of sunlight, fearless, sharp, a complete mystery. With Rachel's help, the labyrinth revealed its truths. The lines shifted, a path opened, and in the heart of the maze, beneath layers of ancient stone and sorrow, they found Daedalus alive in a mechanical body, brilliant and broken. His guilt had built the maze. His past had birthed its traps. And now, Kronos was moments from using it as a weapon. The betrayal came fast. Luke, possessed by Kronos himself, had used Daedalus's inventions to reconstruct the Titan Lord's body. When Percy faced him face to face, it was no longer Luke's voice that answered. It was Kronos, ancient, patient, cold. Percy struck, but Kronos barely flinched. The war had begun. They escaped, barely, returned to Camp Half-Blood just in time for the invasion. Monsters poured from the earth. Campers fought with shields in desperation, and at the front of it all, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover standing between Kronos' army and the last safe place they knew. The battle was brutal. Victory wasn't clean, but they held the line. And when the dust settled, Daedalus, the man who had caused so much pain, gave his final act of redemption. He sacrificed himself to collapse the labyrinth. The paths sealed. The threat, for now, was slowed. Grover found Pan in the silence after the storm. The god was dying not because of violence, but neglect. He passed his spirit to Grover, who now carried the wild within him. Annabeth stood beside Percy, closer than ever, but with a prophecy still looming like thunder. And Percy stood on the edge of 16, the age where everything would either break or begin. And just when he thought the worst was over, Poseidon sent a message, a simple sentence written in sea foam and fear. Brace yourself, it is coming. Because the maze had collapsed, but Kronos had risen, and the final war was no longer a question of if, but when. Prophecies don't scream, they whisper until suddenly they roar. After the Battle of the Labyrinth, nothing was the same. The monsters had found a way in. Kronos had found a body, and Percy Jackson had found clarity not in triumph, but in the weight of what was coming. Camp Half-Blood still stood, but it felt more like a dam, with cracks forming beneath the surface. Annabeth tried to smile through it, sketching designs for a future Olympus, but her pencil trembled. Grover, now the reluctant bearer of Pan's spirit, spoke for nature in ways even he didn't fully understand. Tyson returned to Poseidon's realm to help prepare for a war the sea could no longer avoid. And Percy felt time speeding up, like the gods themselves had taken a breath, and the whole world waited for the exhale. He turned 15, but there was no celebration, no cake, just a visit from Nico D'Angelo, still angry, still alone, but beginning to understand the power he carried. Nico offered Percy a warning and a plan. The only way to defeat Kronos might lie not in strength, but in secrets buried in the underworld. Percy knew the prophecy was coming closer. A child of the eldest gods shall reach 16. And with every passing day, it seemed clearer. That child was him. Not Thalia, not Nico, him. And with that knowledge came a choice, the kind that no sword could answer. Luke had once made a choice, too. A choice that let Kronos in. That twisted hope into betrayal. Percy couldn't afford to repeat that mistake. He would have to choose loyalty and trust and sacrifice, even when everything in him screamed to run. Because the final battle wasn't just near, it was already beginning. Manhattan's skyline trembled with a storm no mortal could name. Gods were vanishing, titans were rising, and Olympus, seat of power, was now an empty palace, guarded by children. The labyrinth had tested their hearts. Now the war would test their souls. The last Olympian waited, and this time there would be no more mazes to hide in. Only war, prophecy, and one final chance to save the world. War doesn't begin with a trumpet. It begins with a whisper that the end is already here. Percy Jackson had always known the prophecy was coming for him. But when the first explosions lit the sky over Manhattan, it stopped being a future threat and became the present. Kronos had risen fully, terribly, using Luke's body like a shell and swinging a scythe that could cut through time itself. The gods were scattered, pulled across the world to battle Typhon, the oldest of monsters, leaving Olympus nearly undefended. Only the minor gods remained bitter, overlooked, and many of them siding with Kronos. And guarding the heart of the divine, the throne room atop the Empire State Building, were the demigods of Camp Half-Blood, barely teenagers, hopelessly outnumbered, but not unprepared. For the first time, every cabin had trained, every rivalry set aside, every hand willing to fight. Percy had spent the months before preparing, recruiting allies, trying to unite a world that had always been divided. He visited his father's realm beneath the sea, only to find Poseidon's palace under siege. He saw his mother again, held her close, a reminder of what he was really fighting for. And then came the decision that would change everything: to bathe in the river Styx. It was the only way to face Kronos and survive. Like Achilles before him, Percy had to anchor his soul in one mortal spot, a small place on his body where death could still reach him. Annabeth tried to stop him. She begged him to live. And in that moment, with the waters of immortality roaring around him, Percy saw the truth. Her. She was his anchor. Not just his friend, not just a fellow warrior. She was the tether that held him to the world. The river granted him power, speed, invincibility, and burden. He returned to Manhattan with a weight of prophecy wrapped around him like armor. And then it began. The bridges collapsed. The sky split. Kronos marched, and Percy, sword in hand, memories in heart, led the charge. But this was not a story of instant victory. It was a siege, a slow unraveling. Demigods fell. Friends bled. The city emptied, frozen in time by the gods to protect the mortals. But nothing could protect the heroes from what was coming. Betrayal, sacrifice, destiny. And in the middle of it all, Nico D'Angelo reappeared no longer a lost boy, but a prince of ghosts, and offered Percy a strategy born of shadows. Use Luke's past to break Kronos from within. Because maybe the prophecy wasn't about killing Kronos, but saving Luke. Percy didn't understand it yet, but the truth was coming fast, burning and impossible to ignore. Some wars are won with swords, but this one was always going to be won with hearts. As the battle for Manhattan raged on, Percy Jackson stood not just as a warrior, but as the center of every prophecy, every fear the gods had buried, and every hope the demigods clung to. Kronos was everywhere, not just in the form of a golden-eyed Luke striking down defenders, but in the fear that rippled through the ranks of the young heroes standing against him. The Empire State Building became a fortress. The streets ran with echoes. Camp Half-Blood's bravest held the line, wave after wave, while Percy raced between fronts, a blur of celestial bronze and divine power. Even with the river Styx shielding him, the burden was unbearable. Ethan Nakamura, son of Nemesis, turned against Kronos and was killed for it. The minor gods, long neglected, revealed their rage and resentment, some joining the enemy simply because Olympus had never seen them. Every decision the gods had made, every dismissal, every forgotten child came back like a tidal wave. Still, Percy didn't break. Annabeth fought by his side, bleeding but unshaken. Grover called on the wild, summoning roots and nature spirits to slow the advance. And in the silence between battles, Percy began to realize something terrifying. The prophecy might not mean what he thought it did. The child of the Big Three, reaching 16, making a choice that could preserve or destroy Olympus. It had always seemed clear, but Nico's theory grew louder in Percy's mind. What if it wasn't about killing Kronos, but letting Luke choose? What if Luke was still in there, beneath the armor and rage, waiting for someone to believe in him one last time? That idea clashed with everything Percy had trained for, everything he thought a hero was supposed to do. But deep down, it felt right. Because Percy had seen what the gods refused to see, that their neglect had created this war. That Luke's fall wasn't just betrayal, it was a symptom of everything broken. The breakthrough came during the final stand, Olympus's throne room in ruins, the gods returning just in time to find their legacy hanging by a thread. Kronos stood over them, blade raised, time splitting with every breath. And in that moment, Percy made his choice. He stepped aside. He handed the dagger to Annabeth, who reminded Luke who he used to be. And Luke, shaking, crying, mortal again in the span of a heartbeat, drove the blade into his own body, his one weak point, to stop Kronos from rising forever. Luke died a hero. And with him, the war ended. Not in a blaze of divine power, but in mercy, in love, in the belief that even those who fall can still rise again. Silence after war is never just quiet. It's the sound of everything you've lost settling into place. As Kronos' essence scattered into time and Luke Castellan's body faded beneath Olympus's shattered throne room, Percy Jackson stood at the heart of a broken world. The battle was over, but the damage had been done. Demigods had died. Buildings had crumbled. Trust had been shattered between gods and children. And yet, against all odds, Olympus still stood. The gods returned, battered and proud, ready to claim victory. Zeus, impassive as ever, offered thanks. Poseidon gave his son a rare smile, full of depth and quiet pain, and then came the choice. A reward, immortality, a seat among the gods, a crown that would end Percy's struggles forever. But Percy, in the moment when most heroes would kneel, said no. He didn't want power, he wanted change. He asked the gods to swear on the river Styx, claim all their children, minor gods included, end the cycle of abandonment, break the legacy of silence. It was the boldest request anyone had made in eons, and they agreed. And that was the twist no one saw coming. Percy didn't just win the war. He rewrote the future. Camp Half-Blood would welcome every child, from Nemesis to Hecate, from Iris to Hypnos. No more forgotten cabins, no more traitors born from neglect. And Annabeth? She received the offer of rebuilding Olympus stone by stone, wisdom reshaping legacy. As for Nico D'Angelo, he remained distant, shadow-bound, but no longer alone. Percy had made peace with him, had accepted the darkness he carried. They all had scars now, but they had earned them. And then, in the quiet of the final night, Percy sat by the lake, 16 years old, alive, loved, still unsure of the prophecy's full meaning, but knowing this much, the choice had been made. Olympus had been saved not by lightning or prophecy, but by loyalty, by letting go. And somewhere in the trees, Annabeth joined him. No monsters, no quests, just a quiet moment, just two heroes resting at last until the next storm. Peace doesn't arrive with fanfare, it drifts in slowly, like a breeze over a battlefield still soaked in memory. After the war, Camp Half-Blood didn't erupt in celebration. It exhaled. The campers, those who survived, carried the weight of victory like armor they could no longer take off. Banners were mended. Cabins were repaired. New ones were built for gods who had never been honored before. For the first time, every demigod had a place and a name above their door. And at the heart of it all stood Percy Jackson, not as a savior, not as a general, but as a boy trying to figure out what life looked like without war looming over him. The gods kept their promise. Children once ignored were claimed, respected, seen. Demigods who had once stood on opposite sides now trained together. Clarice, still fierce, now fought with purpose, not pride. The Stoll brothers smiled a little less mischievously, but their laughter returned in time. Chiron walked the camp with quieter hooves, and Dionysus, surprisingly, seemed softer, as if the edge of battle had dulled even him. Percy and Annabeth grew closer, not because of destiny, but because they chose to. Walks by the lake replaced battles in the woods. Their scars didn't vanish, but they learned to hold them gently. And Grover, now a lord of the wild, traveled between realms, planting hope where the earth had gone silent. Yet peace didn't mean stillness. Jason Grace arrived from the Roman Camp Jupiter, confused, powerful, and full of questions. The two worlds had always existed apart, kept secret even from each other, but now their threads began to intertwine. Piper, daughter of Aphrodite, and Leo, son of Hephaestus, joined the story, each carrying secrets, each unknowingly drawn toward a prophecy even older than the last. Because while Kronos had fallen, Gaia, the earth itself, was beginning to stir. Her whispers curled through dreams, her power older than the gods, older than titans. A new war was brewing, and the next generation would bear the weight. But for now, Percy could breathe. He wasn't 16 anymore. He wasn't just the hero of Olympus. He was a boy in love, a brother, a son, a friend. The kind of peace heroes rarely live to see. And somewhere, far off in the mist, The next legend began to form not out of prophecy, but out of choice. Not all legends end in battle. Some begin in the silence that follows. As Camp Half-Blood settled into its new rhythm, with cabins for every god and every child finally seen, the world Percy Jackson once fought to protect began to reshape itself. The campfires still burned at night, but now they were surrounded by laughter instead of strategy. The swordplay still echoed in the fields, but it was training, not survival. Percy found himself standing at the edge of it all, wondering who he was without the weight of prophecy pressing down on his shoulders. He was older now, not just in age, but in soul. He had seen death, made impossible choices, and lived to walk through the ruins. And yet, the greatest shift wasn't in Olympus or the battlefield it was in. The way Percy started to dream of futures instead of fears. Annabeth, sketching new blueprints for Olympus and camp alike, talked of bridges between the Greek and Roman worlds. Grover became a bridge himself, carrying the spirit of Pan across wild lands, planting seeds in forgotten places. Clarice stood like a pillar, hardened and scarred, but no longer driven by rage, instead by memory. And even Nico D'Angelo, haunted by more loss than most could bear, began to find a strange kind of peace, not in forgetting, but in being understood. The twist came, as always, quietly. Percy was not the only child of prophecy anymore. A new generation was rising. Jason, Piper, Leo demigods, tied to a prophecy not yet fulfilled. And Percy? He was being pulled again, not into war, but into a new kind of mystery one, with storm clouds forming across both coasts. One that whispered names he didn't know, but would soon come to love. But for now, there was still peace. Real peace. And Percy, with Annabeth beside him, and the camp whole for the first time in centuries, understood something he hadn't before. Heroism isn't just sacrifice. It's living after, choosing to build, choosing to love, choosing to hope. And as the stars turned slowly over Half-Blood Hill, the firelight soft and the wind gentle, Percy closed his eyes and finally allowed himself to dream. Not of monsters, not of prophecies, but of what comes next. Because the war had ended, but the dream would continue. A hero's story doesn't end when the war is won. It ends when they finally believe they're allowed to rest. As the dust of prophecy settled and the battles became stories told around campfires, Percy Jackson, the boy who'd once been chased through museums and monsters, the boy who never asked to be chosen, began to feel something strange. Stillness. Not silence. Not emptiness. Just stillness. The kind that comes after years of running, when the world finally stops asking for blood and starts asking what you want instead. But that question was harder than any prophecy. Percy had spent so long surviving that dreaming felt foreign. What did peace look like? What did a future look like? Not just for him, but for the others who walked out of that war still breathing. Annabeth's dreams of building weren't just architectural. Now she saw bridges between worlds, paths between Greek and Roman camps, between gods and demigods, between past and possibility. Grover wandered, yes, but with purpose, singing to trees and waking up forests thought lost. Clarice told stories now loudly, dramatically, but always about the ones who didn't make it. Their names etched into the stone walls of camp, never forgotten. And Nico, once hidden in shadow, slowly began to believe that the sun might rise for him too. But beneath all this peace, the wind still carried whispers. Gaea had begun to stir. Roman demigods were coming. Jason Grace's arrival, quiet but full of fate, marked a new turning. And while Percy didn't know it yet, he was about to be pulled back into the current not as a prophecy's pawn, but as someone older, someone who had already bled for Olympus and now had something to protect. But before that storm, there was a moment, a season where the world breathed, where the lake shimmered, where the stars above Camp Half-Blood blinked gently, not in warning, but in wonder. Percy sat by the shore more often now, not with a sword, not with a prophecy, just with Annabeth's hand in his. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. And in that silence, in that slow unraveling of fear into peace, Percy realized something that would stay with him longer than any prophecy ever did. Being a hero didn't mean burning out. It meant surviving and choosing to dream again. Even after the gods, even after the monsters, even after everything. Because stories don't end when the last page is turned. They echo, they ripple, they inspire the next. And as Percy looked out over the calm water, he smiled because somewhere out there, a new demigod would wake up. A new story would begin. And he had lived long enough to dream of it, not fear it. Even the greatest stories must fade into starlight, eventually, but legends don't sleep, they echo. As Percy Jackson leaned into the quiet of his life, the world he once fought to save didn't fall silent. It simply turned a page. Camp Half-Blood no longer whispered prophecies from darkened caves, but sang with new voices, new faces, new kids learning who they were and daring to believe they belonged. The cabins, once cold monuments to absent gods, glowed with laughter and late-night sword practice. Younger campers ran through the strawberry fields without fear, and when they looked up to the big house porch, they didn't see warriors preparing for war. They saw protectors, teachers, legends in camp shirts with stories in their scars. Percy walked among them now, not as a boy burdened by destiny, but as someone who had earned peace the hard way. But even in peace, the past didn't vanish. Sometimes it arrived in a dream, soft waves crashing, a voice calling from the sea. Sometimes it showed up in the form of a new demigod, confused and trembling. And Percy would see his younger self in their eyes and offer them something he never had, a guide. The gods still stirred, yes. The earth still trembled. Gaea loomed in dreams, and new heroes like Jason, Leo, Piper, and Hazel would rise to carry the next weight. But for now, the story of Percy Jackson, the boy who should have drowned in a museum fountain, the boy who faced titans and turned down immortality, settled into something deeper, not an ending, a legacy. His choices had changed the gods. His mercy had redeemed a fallen hero. And his heart, wild, loyal, stubborn, had proven that the prophecy was never about power. It was about choice. And as you, listener, drift away into sleep, remember this. You are part of this world too. You don't need a prophecy to matter. You don't need a sword to be brave. The monsters may look different in your life, but the courage to face them, that's always been yours. Let this story be your reminder that even in darkness, even when the odds seem ancient and cruel, you can still rise. You can still choose, because the dream doesn't end here. It continues with you.